I've never been one to believe in much of anything, especially after so many years on the road. We learn to laugh at the stories they tell at gas stations or in diners on the side of the highway. There's always someone talking about strange things, figures in the woods, voices on the radio. But that night, man, to this day, when I close my eyes, I still hear the sound of knocks. It was supposed to be just another long trip, cutting across I-70 in Colorado, when I decided to stop at a rest area near Rifle. It was almost 2 in the morning, and sleep was starting to take its toll. I parked, closed the cabin curtain and lay down to take a few hours of rest. The place was deserted. A single yellow light blinked on a streetlight ahead, and all you could hear was the wind blowing through the branches. Nothing out of the ordinary. I wrapped myself in the blanket and must have passed out within a few minutes. But I can't say how long it took before I woke up again, out of nowhere, with a strange feeling in my chest. It was as if someone was looking at me. I stayed quiet for a while, thinking it was paranoia. But then came the knocks. 3 soft taps on the side of the truck, on the passenger side. They weren't strong, they weren't aggressive. It was as if someone was trying to get attention, but in a restrained way, almost respectful, if you could call it that. I sat on the bed and listened, without the courage to pull the curtain. My first thought was that it could be another truck driver, someone in need of help, I don't know. I took a flashlight and slowly opened the curtain. Nothing. The darkness outside seemed even thicker than before. I waited a while, listening for any other sounds. But all that came was that oppressive silence, broken only by the distant sound of crickets and a coyote howling somewhere in the distance. I took a deep breath, put on my boots and got out of the truck, pointing the flashlight at the surroundings. That's when I saw the footprints. They were on the dirt, right next to the truck. They were the marks of bare feet, covered in mud, heading towards the driver's door. But the really strange thing was that there was only one set of footprints, and they stopped there. There was no sign of return, no sign that the person had been nearby before. They just came from out of the dark, straight to the door, and then disappeared. I got goosebumps at the time. I surrounded the entire truck, sweeping everything with the flashlight, but I didn't find anyone. No cars stopped, no souls alive. Just that cold wind, the footprints and the horrible feeling that something was still nearby, watching. I went back to the cabin feeling a bit stuck. I locked everything, pulled the curtain again and sat there, with the flashlight still on in my hand. Sleep was gone for good. What bothered me was not just the fact that someone had come so close without me noticing, but the way those footprints simply started out of nowhere and ended there, as if the person had appeared out of the dark. I kept trying to find some logical explanation, maybe someone was camping nearby, or lost on the road, I don't know. But even though I tried to rationalize it, the discomfort didn't go away. It was as if the air inside the truck had become denser, heavier. It's difficult to even breathe properly. That's when I heard it again. 3 more beats. This time, on the driver's door. But the sound was different. Still smooth, but slower, more spaced out. As if the person knew I was listening and was calmly insisting. I didn't have the courage to look out the window. I remained completely still, just staring at the curtain as if it would tear at any moment. I don't know how to explain it, but it was as if that thing, whatever it was, knew I was inside, awake. Time passed slowly, each second seemed to stretch. And the worst thing was that I couldn't hear anything other than my own heart beating in my chest. No breathing outside, no footsteps. Just the sound that kept echoing in my head. After a while, I don't know if it was minutes or more than an hour, I lost track, I gained courage again. I took the tire iron that I always leave on the side and went to the window. I took a deep breath and pulled the curtain back at once. Again, nothing. No sign of anyone. But the footprints, now I had more. And they were fresh. They had joined the previous ones and were spread around the truck, as if someone had circled it several times. The mud was still wet, as if it had been left there seconds ago. And then, finally, I started to feel really scared. Physical fear. That irrational fear that catches your throat and leaves your legs wobbly. I stood there, trying to think of what to do. Getting out of there would be the obvious thing to do, but I didn't want to start the truck and attract even more attention if that thing was still close. I tried to pick up my cell phone, but of course, there was no signal. Nothing. As if that place had been ripped off the map for a few hours. I didn't have much to do other than wait. So I leaned against the door and remained silent, with my ears open for any unusual sounds. The darkness outside seemed even more alive, as if it had eyes. I thought I saw a shadow move near the lamppost, but I couldn't focus. I bitterly regretted stopping there. And then, the smell came. It was a damp, strong smell, like wet earth mixed with something rotten. It entered through the cracks in the cabin and stuck to the nose. I couldn't quite identify it, but it reminded me of that smell of an abandoned basement or an animal that had been dead for days. And that only confirmed the feeling that something was wrong, very wrong. I huddled there, silent, trying to convince myself that maybe it was just my head playing tricks on me because of my exhaustion. But then I heard the sound of the door handle trying to open. Slowly. As if anyone outside was in no hurry. But I was absolutely sure that I had locked everything. The noise stopped. Then more silence. A silence so profound it made me dizzy. I felt like I was alone in the world, like time had frozen just for me. And in the middle of it all, a completely different sound came, a whisper, very low, on the window glass. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I could feel his intention. It was a calm, continuous whisper, almost like a prayer, or a threat. I had never felt that before, a fear that doesn't come from something you see, but from what you feel is touching you inside. And even though I didn't see anything, I knew there was something there. On the other side of the glass. Facing me. I think I deleted it. I didn't pass out, I didn't sleep. My body just shut down. When I woke up, it was already daytime. The sky was clear, and everything around seemed normal. But the mud marks were still there, now dry, spread around the truck. I left with my breath caught and went around everything again. There was no more smell, no noise, no sign of anyone. And then, when I went to open the driver's door, I saw that someone, or something, had left a scratch on the bodywork. 4 parallel marks, as if they were nails. It wasn't deep, but it was there. And I swear by everything, I didn't hear any sound that could explain that during the night. None. I never stopped in an isolated area again. It may seem like an exaggeration, but I avoid any place that doesn't have at least 2 or 3 trucks parked nearby. I've heard similar stories since then, but none exactly the same. And the weird thing is that every time I try to remember that night, it seems like some parts are blurry. As if my head wouldn't let me access everything. I don't know what that was. I don't know what you wanted from me. I just know that, to this day, when I'm driving in the early hours of the morning and I see some strange shadow on the side of the road, my first impulse is still to look in the mirrors and check if there's mud on the ground. I've been on the road for over 15 years. There are things that we learn to ignore, tiredness, strange engine noises, that weight on the back of someone who drives for hours at a time without stopping. But there are other things that remain. That stick to us. And that night. I swear, it was unlike anything I've ever experienced. It was a dawn like any other, crossing a deserted stretch of US 191, close to the border with Utah. No radio signal, no headlights coming in the opposite direction. Just the noise of the engine and that dry silence that only exists in the middle of nowhere. The road seemed endless. Clear sky, no moon, everything dark around. Every now and then, just the eyes of an animal reflecting on the edge of the track. I hadn't slept well the day before, so my head was already a little confused. I started looking in the rearview mirror more often than usual, you know? That automatic habit of checking behind, even when you know no one is coming. And it was during one of those quick glances that I saw it. A silhouette. Dark. Stopped in the middle of the road, right behind the truck. But I couldn't understand what it was. It looked like a person, but it didn't seem alive. I did what anyone would do. I immediately looked through the back window. But, of course, there was nothing. The track was empty, as always. I thought it could be reflection, tiredness, some shadow from a tree, even without there being any trees there. But there was something about that figure that wouldn't leave my head. The way she was standing still, without a defined shape, as if she were made of smoke or condensed shadow. And the worst part, even after seeing nothing else, the feeling remained. That strong impression that there was someone there, watching me, glued to the back bumper, just waiting for me to falter. I continued driving with my heart racing. I turned on the radio, even though there was no signal, just to hear some chirping and not feel so alone. But every time I looked in the rearview mirror, even though I didn't see anything new, it seemed like something was moving in the background. As if the mirror itself was distorting reality. And, man, I swear by everything, it started to feel like this kind of heat in my neck. A physical feeling of presence. Like when someone touches you and you feel the hair on your arm stand up before you even turn to look. But I was alone. Or I thought I was. I tried not to look in the mirror anymore. I forced myself to focus on the road, on the white streaks passing under the headlights. But it was no use. The feeling that there was something accompanying me grew, as if it was getting closer, more present. The air inside the cabin began to change. My mouth was dry, my eyes burned, as if the air was becoming thicker, heavier. I started to break out in a cold sweat, even with the air conditioning on full blast. There was no logical explanation for that. All I know is that every minute it was like something was sticking to the back of the truck, and working up the nerve. After about 10 minutes of this tension, I couldn't stand it. I needed to look. I needed to make sure it was all in my head. And then, when I looked up at the rearview mirror, she was there again. But now closer. It was a tall, dark, hunched figure, as if its spine was broken forward. I couldn't see a face, or clothes, or anything. Just that dark outline, still, but strange, as if it were shaking slightly, like an image on a TV out of tune. And even with the truck going 80 per hour, she seemed fixed there. Property. Following with me. I almost lost control of the steering wheel. I accidentally pulled it to the side, the truck shook. I screamed. I don't even remember what I screamed, I just remember the despair. When I looked back again, the figure was gone. Nothing. Again. As if it had never been there. But the feeling, that fucking feeling continued. But now, it was different. More intense. As if she had stepped out of the rearview mirror. As if he had entered the cabin. You know when you know, without seeing it, that someone is behind you? I was driving, but my whole body wanted to turn my head, wanted to look back. But I couldn't. I was frozen. I drove looking ahead, with my eyes wide, without blinking. The steering wheel is hard in my sweaty hands, as if it were my only anchor in the real world. Any noise inside the cabin seemed louder, closer. The passenger seat creaked slightly and I almost cried. There was no one there. I knew I didn't have it. But the air on my side felt busy. As if there was a shift in weight, presence, movement. The road went straight, empty, endless. And there I was, driving like a zombie, trying not to panic, trying not to breathe too loud. Because, somehow, I felt that if I showed fear, it would react. After a while, I don't know how long exactly, I saw a stopping area ahead. An old station, with only a working fuel pump and a sign flashing irregularly. I didn't even think. I threw the truck to the side of the road and entered the dirt yard. As soon as I parked, I turned off the engine and stood there, motionless, with my hand on the steering wheel and my heart coming out of my mouth. The silence returned in an almost aggressive way. And then, for the first time since it all started, I looked straight into the rearview mirror. There was nothing. Just the empty road, the still night, and a faint trail of dust settling. I got out of the truck shaking. I stood outside, breathing the cold early morning air, trying to convince myself that it was just a tired head. But when I walked around the truck, I looked at the rear bodywork, and I saw something that chilled me to the bone. There were marks there. As if fingers, too long to be human, had been dragged through the dirt of the truck. 5 parallel lines, somewhat crooked, running from the bottom to the container door. They weren't there when I filled up a few hours earlier. I'm sure. That kind of dirt is noticeable. And yet, they were there. Visible. Recent. I entered the gas station, ordered a coffee and sat there, quietly, looking at the truck through the window. I waited until dawn to hit the road again. And since then, I've never traveled again without attaching a black tape to the cabin's interior rearview mirror. It may seem like nonsense, superstition, but I prefer not to see anything else reflected there. After that night, the mirror became a threat. An open window to something that shouldn't be accompanying me. I don't know what it was, I don't know what I wanted. I just know that you saw me. He really saw me. And, somehow, he still sees me from time to time. There are days when I wake up in the middle of the night, in the cabin, and realize I'm looking in the mirror, even with it covered. As if my eyes were looking for that thing on their own, automatically. The feeling returns, the air feels heavy, and sometimes I'm sure that, even without seeing it, it's there. Stop. On my side. Waiting for me to look again. I was driving alone, another early morning on an endless road. US 80, cutting through Texas, is one of the loneliest routes there is. There were no other trucks on the road, just the constant noise of the engine and the sound of the CB radio tuned to any channel. Fatigue was hitting me hard, but I had a good stretch ahead of me. With no cell phone signal, no one to talk to, I just sat there, listening to the radio chirping and trying to stay alert. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about how empty life on the road is, as if the asphalt were the only friend that accompanied me. That's when the voice came. It wasn't just any voice, no. It was familiar, deep, with that drawl that I don't hear from anyone else. It was as if someone had called me directly. The first thing that crossed my mind was that it could be a truck driver lost on the same road, trying to pass on some information. Turn right at the next exit, then keep left until the gas station. Be careful with the sharp curve ahead, the pavement is broken. The voice spoke with a calm and authority that, at first, seemed normal to me. I was curious, so I picked up the radio microphone. I tried to respond, but the microphone just made a static noise, as if something was interfering. The voice then returned. "Is everything okay there, friend? Just follow the instructions and you'll be fine." I don't know what came over me, but I started following exactly the instructions he gave, as if it were a normal thing, as if I wasn't questioning anything. The voice seemed closer and closer, almost as if it were inside the cabin with me. At every turn, at every detour, she guided me with such precision that I was speechless. It was as if that man knew the road better than I did, as if he had already walked that path 1,000 times. I didn't know who he was, but it felt like he knew me. When I passed through the exit he indicated, his voice changed tone, calmer, as if he had been watching me for some time. "Now, you will see a gas station on your left. You can stop there, rest a little. I will wait for you there." That gave me goosebumps. How did he know where I was going to end up? The station was really small, with no movement. I was about to turn the corner, when the voice came again, with a weak, almost muffled laugh. "You'll understand when you get there." My skin crawled again, and I decided to stop. The road was empty, and something about those words made me uncomfortable. I arrived at the gas station. The place was so empty that it seemed to have been forgotten by time. The only light came from a dim bulb flickering at the entrance. I parked the truck and turned off the engine, still with the voice from the radio echoing in my mind. I sat there, staring into space. The feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. I looked at the CB radio, as if waiting for the voice to return, but silence was the only return. A strange feeling began to take over me. Something was wrong, but I didn't know exactly what it was. I decided to get out of the truck to stretch my legs. The cold wind cut into my skin and, as I walked towards the station, I started to hear footsteps. But it wasn't the sound of my own footsteps. They sounded like heavy footsteps, coming from someone else, someone approaching. I looked around and didn't see anyone. Just the empty gas station, the deserted road and the sound of my breathing. Suddenly the radio crackled again. The voice came back, weaker, as if it were far away now. "I warned you. You should have paid more attention last time." It was as if someone was talking to me from inside the station, but there was no one there. I took a step back, confused, and walked over to the radio, my hands shaking. "Who are you?" I asked, voice cracking. But the answer came from a place it shouldn't have been. "I am what you didn't want to see." Static filled the radio, and then I realized what was happening. The sound of the voice became clearer and clearer, and I could hear details that disconcerted me even more. Every instruction, every word, seemed too familiar. As if I had heard that before. I wanted to turn everything off, but my hand wouldn't move, as if something was stopping me. That was when the radio aired one last broadcast. "I'm already at the station. I got there years ago, and you still haven't noticed." The voice was cold, almost lifeless. It was like a blade of ice going through my spine. My blood instantly ran cold, and my thoughts went blank. "What do you mean, I got there years ago?" I could only think of one thing, that voice. It wasn't just any truck driver. It was the voice of someone who was already dead. Jaw shaking, I looked around, trying to find something that made sense. But nothing made sense anymore. Just the silence, the wind, and that growing feeling that something had died along with the words he said. I didn't know what else to do. The radio continued to emit that static, and the voice's words were repeating in my head like a distant echo. "I'm already in post, you haven't noticed." I stood there, still, trying to process what was happening. I started walking in circles, looking at the gas station, looking for any clues. The dim light from the lamp flickered on, and the wind only picked up, bringing a rusty smell, as if the place itself was rotting with time. I went to the cashier, but the place was closed. No movement. Not a soul alive. Just the feeling that I was being watched the entire time. Suddenly, a door to the station opened on its own, with a loud creak. The darkness inside seemed to swallow everything. I hesitated for a second, but the feeling of something or someone calling me was so strong that I ended up heading towards the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I entered, the only sound was my own breathing. The air was thick, as if it were stuffy. And then, deep down, something flashed. It was an old, yellowed photo, lying on the floor near the window. I crouched down and looked. The man in the photo had the same face as the voice. The same calm and deep look. But in the corner of the photo, the date made me freeze. It was from 1985. And the name below it? George Timmons. My mind went blank for a few seconds, trying to make the connection. I couldn't reason anymore. George Timmons, the name was there, right in front of me, as if it were a warning. The feeling that I was there for some reason that I didn't understand became even stronger. I looked up, and that's when the radio crackled again. The voice, softer this time, told me, "Now you know. There is no turning back." There was nothing else to do. The post was empty. There was no one there except me. The radio, the echo of the voice, everything seemed to have come from another time, another place. And when I left there, without looking back, the road looked different. As if the shadows had lengthened. As if the night had lengthened, as if time had ceased to exist. Since then, I have never taken that route again. I never saw that post again. And every time I turn on the CB radio, I still hear the voice. Except now, I know she'll never let me go. George Timmons, the truck driver who died years ago, is still waiting. I was driving down the same empty road I always cross when traveling north. US 1, in the middle of the night, is a quiet, desolate place. The road seems to stretch forever, and the silence is interrupted only by the noise of the engine and my own breathing. I was going from Tampa to Atlanta, a common route for me, but that night was different. Something strange happened that left me feeling like I would never be the same again. I don't know how to explain it properly, but it was as if the asphalt itself was carrying a feeling of foreboding, a feeling that something was lurking, just waiting for the right moment. I was driving calmly, listening to the low sound of the radio, trying to distract myself. The road was completely deserted, with no cars, no lights, just darkness and a headlight that cut through the pitch black. Then, right in front of me, in the lane of the road, something appeared that didn't make sense. It was like a shadow, but with a defined shape. I couldn't see it clearly, the creature was far enough away, but I could tell it didn't look like an ordinary animal. The thing had a strange movement, almost as if it were gliding along the ground, without the heavy steps of an ordinary being. I stopped the truck immediately, with my heart racing. I didn't know what to do, but something told me that I shouldn't continue driving without knowing what it was. The creature didn't seem to mind my presence. She was crossing the lane slowly, as if she was moving leisurely, completely ignoring the road in front of her. She had an elongated body, covered in dark, almost black skin, and her head was too large for her body. I still couldn't understand what I was seeing, but what scared me most was the fact that its movements were almost hypnotic, as if it was dragging itself effortlessly. It didn't make any sound. Nothing. I tried to take a step towards it, I wanted to see it closer, to know what it was. But when I got a few meters closer, the creature simply disappeared. It disappeared into the night, as if it had never existed. I stood there for a while, with the truck door open, trying to understand what had just happened. I looked everywhere, but the creature was no longer there. There was no sound, no movement. The road remained deserted, as if nothing had happened. I looked at the ground and saw something that made my stomach turn. There were tracks, but they weren't like the tracks of any animal I've ever seen. They were long, dark lines, as if something had crawling in a strange way, leaving a mark of something sticky and dense. I couldn't see it clearly, but the smell was horrible, like something rotten, something no one should smell on the side of a road. I crouched down to look at the tracks more closely. The feeling that he was being watched increased with every second. That didn't make sense. It couldn't be an ordinary animal. The marks on the floor were too wide, and the way they were arranged seemed deliberate. As if something was trying to hide its path or confuse those who followed it. I looked back to the spot where the creature had disappeared, but there was no sign of anything. No sound. No movement. Only the gentle wind that cut across the road. I felt completely alone, more isolated than ever, and something inside me knew I shouldn't stay there for too long. I decided to go back to the truck, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. Each step toward the vehicle felt slower than the last, as if the ground was sticking to my feet. When I got into the truck and closed the door, a feeling of claustrophobia came over me. I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something on the road behind me. But nothing. Only darkness, broken by the light of the headlights. I started the engine and took off, feeling that if I stayed there for a second longer, something very bad would happen. But even with the truck moving, something still bothered me. The air inside the cabin was strange, charged, and I felt a chill run down my spine. As I drove, trying to ignore the feeling that something was following me, I started looking in the mirrors. Every time I took a quick look, I swore I saw something moving on the edge of the road in the distance. But whenever I looked directly, there was nothing. Just darkness. I started to speed up, more and more, trying to leave that feeling behind. But the faster I drove, the stronger the feeling of being watched became. It was as if the creature was still there, out of my field of vision, following me closely. Every curve, every road that stretched out in front of me seemed to be an extension of emptiness. I passed for a few more miles, trying to convince myself that it was all just my imagination. But the smell was still there, that sickening odor of something rotten that seemed to float in the air, chasing me. And then, in the corner of my eye, I saw it. Again. The shadow, the creature, or whatever it was. It was there, on the other side of the road, moving with that same strange, hypnotic movement. But this time, it didn't seem to disappear. She was following the truck, moving in the dark, almost as if she were lying in wait. Fear set in with terrible force, and the only thought running through my head was, "Don't look back." Instinct made me press the accelerator even more. I didn't want to see anything else, I didn't want to know what it was. But as much as I tried not to look, a part of me was begging to understand what was happening. I quickly glanced in the rearview mirror, and what I saw made my heart stop. The creature was now right behind the truck, almost at my heels, its eyes shining like 2 points of light in the darkness. It was no longer a shadow, now it was something real, almost physical. Something big, monstrous, with long claws and a disproportionate head. She seemed to follow me, hunt me, as if she was waiting for the wrong move. I don't know how long I spent like that, looking at the mirrors, trying to speed up without looking back. I was completely panicked, and every second seemed to last an eternity. The road ahead of me became darker and tighter, as if the night was closing in around me. And when I finally looked ahead, I saw something that made me lose my mind, a sharp curve approaching quickly. If I didn't brake, I would run off the road, but if I brake, I knew the creature would catch up to me. I made a decision on instinct, I turned the steering wheel into the corner without thinking. The truck skidded, the wheels squealed, but I managed to maintain control. When I finished turning the corner, I quickly looked at the mirrors again. And that's when it all disappeared. The creature. The smell. The feeling of being followed. Everything disappeared, as if it had never existed. I was alone on the road again, with the sound of the engine echoing in the silent night. I stopped the truck, shaking, and took a deep breath. I looked outside, into nothingness, but there was nothing but pitch black. I knew I couldn't trust my eyes or my mind anymore. I didn't know what had happened, but one thing was certain: I would never travel alone at night again. Not after that. The next day, I went back to the point where it all happened, trying to find some explanation, some sign that what I saw was real. But the road was clear. No traces, no marks. The only thing that remained was the feeling that the creature had never disappeared, that it was still there, lurking, waiting. The fear stayed with me, and every time I travel that road again, my stomach drops and my eyes never stop searching. I don't know what that was, but I know it's out there, waiting. And I don't have the courage to go back and find out. I was traveling on US 395, that isolated road in the California desert, at night. The atmosphere was strange, heavy, as if the air was charged with something I couldn't identify. It felt like something was waiting for me, but I just wanted to get to my destination. After hours on the road, I decided to stop at a rest area, an isolated place, with no one around, just me and the silence. When I parked the truck and turned off the engine, I felt a temporary peace, like I could finally relax. But soon, that peace was broken. I was sitting in the driver's seat, playing with the radio, trying to pick up a station, when I saw a figure approaching along the road. He was a man, tall and thin, with an old hat, looking a little worn out. He approached my window with a strange smile on his face, as if he already knew I was there. "You're a traveler, aren't you?" he said, in a hoarse voice. I nodded, not quite understanding what he wanted. He didn't look scary, but something about him made me uncomfortable. "I have something for you," he said, holding out his hand with an old map, all yellowed and torn at the edges. At first, I thought it was some kind of trick, some kind of offer, but curiosity made me take the map. It was almost damp to the touch, and the printing on the sheet seemed to have been done by hand, like something very old, from times gone by. I looked at the map, and it pointed to a distant point. "Here," he said, "if you follow this path you will find something that few have seen and lived to tell about." He smiled again, with a sparkle in his eyes, as if he knew something I didn't. I stared at him for a while, not understanding. When I looked again, the man was already gone. There was no longer any sign of him on the road. I stood there, with the map in my hand, not knowing what to think, but something told me that I should follow that path. Curiosity spoke louder. I decided to follow the map. I was already tired from the road, and who knows what that man wanted to show me? I thought it was just another bizarre trip, something strange but not dangerous. I followed the instructions on the map, and began driving along a dirt road, further and further away from any sign of civilization. The hours passed and the road became increasingly narrow, with no signs, no lights. I was going to a completely unknown place. The trees began to close in on the road, and the feeling of being lost began to grow, but something inside me said there was no turning back. The dirt road seemed endless. I drove for over an hour, with the truck's headlights cutting through the darkness like a knife. The sound of the engine was the only thing that broke the absolute silence around me. The landscape was changing subtly, but when I noticed it, I was already surrounded by a thick fog, almost as if time had stopped there. I sped up a little, but the fog seemed to follow me, swallowing every bit of the road, making everything narrower and more threatening. The feeling that something was wrong grew with every second. That's when I saw it. Deep inside, between the trees, a faint light shone. It wasn't a headlight, nor any light you'd expect to find on a deserted road. It was a faint, greenish light, as if it were coming from a place that shouldn't exist. I slowed down, my stomach clenching. Curiosity pushed me forward, as if that glow was the only thing that could give me any explanation. I headed towards the light, and it was then that I started to see the first structures. They looked old, like something that shouldn't be there. Small buildings, with stone walls covered in moss, as if they had been there for centuries. I stopped the truck at the entrance of some kind of abandoned village, or at least, it seemed like that. The houses were in ruins, but there was still something strange about them. No sound. Nothing. Just the wind passing through the trees and the feeling that time, somehow, was standing still there. The map the man gave me indicated I was in the right place, but something told me I shouldn't be there. Doubt consumed me, but my desire to understand what was happening made me get out of the truck. As I walked, I felt more and more disconnected from everything. The little village was immersed in oppressive darkness, as if the sun had never reached it. I passed a house with broken windows, and what I saw made me freeze. Inside, the greenish light I had seen before seemed to be reflected off the walls. But it wasn't just a light. They looked like figures, shadows moving slowly, as if they were watching. I took a step back, my heart racing, but something pushed me to continue. I was there for some reason, and I couldn't go back now. I went a little further, and that's when I noticed something even stranger. In the center of the small village, there was a large stone, covered in symbols that seemed to vibrate with their own energy. The greenish light seemed to emanate from it, as if the ground itself was absorbing the light from somewhere deep. I approached, not knowing if I was doing the right thing. When I touched the stone, a feeling of deep cold came over me, as if the air around me had become too thick to breathe. It was at that moment that I realized I was no longer alone. In the corner of my vision, something moved. A figure, a shadow, so dark that it seemed to absorb the light around it. I turned around quickly, but there was no one. Just the wind and absolute silence. But then, the sound came. It wasn't the sound of footsteps, nor the wind. It was a voice, low and distorted, whispering my name. I looked around but couldn't see where it was coming from. Fear rose like a wave, and something inside me said go away. I wanted to run, but my body was paralyzed, as if something was stopping me from moving. Suddenly, all the houses began to shake, the broken windows shook, and the greenish light intensified. The shadows that had previously been in the windows began to move toward me, and the feeling of being watched turned into an oppressive presence, real and threatening. I saw something emerge from the darkness, a figure of indefinite shape, with glowing eyes and a body that seemed distorted, floating, without touching the ground. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. I couldn't move anymore, as if I were trapped in that place, in that moment that seemed to drag on for hours. In the last moment of lucidity, I managed to take a step back, and then I ran. I ran like never before in my life. I went back to the truck, got in and started the engine, without looking back. The road seemed longer now, as if time was stretching out, pulling me back to that place. When I finally could see the road lights back, I breathed a sigh of relief, but the map was there, in my hand, now with markings that weren't there before. I don't know what happened that night, or what I saw, but one thing is certain, I will never stop in isolated places again, and that map, it will never leave my life again.